She looked me in the eye and said it as if it were the simplest truth in the world. "You're powerless, Julia. You always have been." The words sliced through the cold November air like a knife. I felt my breath catch the winter chill biting at my skin as I stood there on the front porch, my fingers clutching the keys she'd just dropped into my hand. They were keys to nothing, an empty gesture, a show of false generosity that everyone else would call kindness. But I saw the truth in her eyes. She didn't see me as a threat. She saw me as the quiet one, the one who would always step back and let her take the spotlight, the one who would nod politely and swallow every bitter word that clung to the air between us. I had spent years playing that part, years, convincing myself that silence was strength and that patience would somehow buy me a place in the family I had always felt on the edge of. But standing there on that cold morning, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe before. I was done being the quiet one. I turned the keys over in my hand, feeling the chill of the metal seep into my skin. The house behind her loomed like a monument to everything I had lost, every dream, every promise she had whispered, and then stolen away. My father's house, my father's promises. And now she was here to tell me that none of it was ever really mine. I forced myself to look back at her, to see the smug tilt of her mouth and the hard glint in her eyes. She was dressed in her usual elegance, every hair in place, every word carefully chosen. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to accept the role she had written for me. But I couldn't. Not this time. "I think you're wrong," I said softly. My voice didn't waver, though my heart was hammering in my chest. "I think you're afraid I might not be powerless after all." For a moment she blinked, just a flicker so quick I almost missed it. But it was enough. Enough to tell me that, for the first time, she wasn't sure how to read me. She didn't answer, didn't even let her expression slip. She just turned away the keys I held in my hand, suddenly feeling like something more than just metal and old memories. They were a promise, a quiet vow that I wouldn't fade into the background anymore. Inside the house, I could see the faint glow of the chandelier, the flicker of shadows moving through the warm golden light. Voices drifted out to where I stood, my brother's laughter, my sister-in-law's soft hum of agreement. They had gathered without me, as they always did, their conversations built on the assumption that I had nothing to add. I stepped forward, the wooden porch creaking under my feet. My fingers tightened around the keys. As I pushed the door open, the scent of cedar and old wood wrapping around me like a memory. The warmth inside was almost overwhelming after the cold, but it couldn't chase away the chill that had settled in my bones. They looked up as I entered, a dozen sets of eyes flicking toward me, and then away. I saw the surprise in some, the annoyance in others, but I didn't let it stop me. I walked slowly across the room, my footsteps steady, and took a seat by the window. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the world in white. I watched them swirl past the glass, each one a quiet testament to the power of persistence. Alone, a snowflake is fragile, but together, they cover everything. She moved closer, her voice low, as she leaned down to speak in my ear. "You're making a mistake, Julia," she said softly. "This fight will destroy you." I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I let the silence stretch between us until it was her turn to feel the weight of it. "Maybe," I said, "but I'd rather be destroyed than invisible." For the first time, her perfect mask slipped. Just a crack, but it was enough. Enough for me to see the fear behind the calm, the uncertainty behind the cruelty. She straightened her lips, pressed into a thin line, and walked away. I watched her go, my fingers still tight around the keys she had tried to make me see as worthless. I knew better now. They weren't just keys to a house, they were the first pieces of a truth she had tried so hard to bury. And I would dig until I found it. As the snow fell faster outside, I leaned back in my chair and let a quiet smile curve my lips. She thought I was powerless, but she didn't understand that sometimes power doesn't come from noise or fury. Sometimes it comes from the quiet determination of someone who has nothing left to lose. And I was ready to show her just how powerful that could be. That night the whisper started. I lay awake in the small bedroom at the back of the house, the old radiator clanking in the corner, like a restless spirit. The voices from downstairs rose and fell, muffled through the walls, but carrying the same sharp undertone that had followed me all my life. "She's causing trouble again," my brother's voice drifted up the stairs. Calm, measured, like he was talking about the weather, not about me. "She's always been like this." My sister-in-law answered, her voice softer, but no less cutting. "She never learned to accept her place." It's sad, really. She could have been part of this family if she'd just known when to stop. I pressed my hand to the blanket, my fingers twisting in the worn fabric. The words weren't new. They had been with me since I was a child, unspoken, but always there, echoes of doubt that had shaped me into the quiet shadow they wanted me to be. For so long I believed them. I believed that being quiet was the same as being safe, that if I didn't rock the boat, I would be allowed to stay. But as I lay there in the dark, the keys heavy on the nightstand beside me, I knew I couldn't go back to that. I wasn't the girl who would let them decide my worth anymore. In the morning, I forced myself out of bed before dawn. The house was still and silent, the only sound the faint whistle of the wind through the cracks in the old windows. I dressed quickly, the cold air biting at my skin as I pulled my coat around me. I walked through the empty halls, my footsteps soft on the worn wooden floors. Family portraits stared down at me from the walls, smiling faces in gilded frames, a history written by the ones who had always claimed to know best. I paused in front of one, my mother's face, captured in sepia and shadow. Her eyes were gentle, her smile kind, but there was a sadness there I had never noticed before. A hint of something unspoken, something that felt like it had been passed down to me like an heirloom. "She wouldn't have wanted this," I whispered to the still air. "She wouldn't have wanted me to disappear." I turned away before the tears could come, my heart a tight knot in my chest. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of coffee and warm bread, a comforting scent that couldn't chase away the chill in the air. My sister-in-law looked up from the stove, her expression carefully blank. "You're up early," she said lightly, as if the night before hadn't happened. "I couldn't sleep," I said simply. She nodded, but her eyes were calculating, her smile too tight to be real. "You should try to rest more, Julia. All this stress. It isn't good for you." I said nothing. I let the silence be my answer. I sat at the small table by the window, watching the snow fall in slow, lazy spirals. The keys were in my pocket, their weight a constant reminder of everything that was at stake. They thought I would give up, that I would see the mountain before me and turn away. But they didn't know me anymore. After breakfast, I slipped out of the house and into the cold morning air. My breath fogged in front of me as I walked down the icy path to the old shed at the edge of the property. My father's tools were still there, covered in dust and memory. I pushed the door open, the scent of old wood and oil filling my lungs. The place was just as I remembered, cluttered, chaotic, but honest in a way the house never was. I found what I was looking for in a battered metal box, under the workbench papers. My father had kept hidden away notes and ledgers that told a different story than the one my siblings had tried to sell me. I sat on the cold concrete floor, the papers spread out around me, like a map of everything they thought I would never find. My fingers traced the careful lines of my father's handwriting, each word a quiet testament to the truth he had tried to leave behind. As I read, the pieces began to fit together. The missing funds, the sudden changes in ownership, the quiet manipulations that had turned my inheritance into their weapon. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. I felt the anger settle in my chest, cold and clean. This wasn't just about me, it was about the way they had twisted his memory, turned his love into something they could use to keep me small. I gathered the papers, carefully tucking them into my coat, before stepping back out into the snow. The wind was sharp against my face, but I welcomed it. It felt like a promise, a reminder that the truth couldn't be buried forever. Back at the house, I walked through the front door, with my head high, the papers pressed against my heart like armor. My sister-in-law looked up from the sink, her eyes narrowing as she took in my expression. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice casual, but her eyes sharp. "Just Taking a walk, I said lightly. Getting some air. She didn't push, but I saw the suspicion there. She knew something had shifted. She could feel it in the air between us. I went up to my room and locked the door behind me, the weight of the keys and the papers grounding me like never before. I sat at the small desk by the window, the snow still falling softly outside, and let myself breathe. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. They had spent so long telling me I was powerless, but they didn't understand that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet determination of someone who knows the truth and refuses to let it go. I looked out at the snow-covered world and let a small smile curve my lips. They thought I was powerless, but I was done letting them decide who I was. The snow had stopped by the time the sun rose, leaving the world hushed and bright. I stood at the window of my small room, watching the light catch on the ice-crusted branches, and felt a flicker of something that felt almost like hope. The papers I'd found in the shed lay spread out across my desk, the careful lines of my father's handwriting a map to the secrets they had tried so hard to bury. I traced the words with my finger, each stroke a quiet promise I would not let them erase me. Downstairs, the house was alive with quiet conspiracies. I could hear my brother's low voice in the hallway, my sister-in-law's soft murmurs that never quite reached my ears. They thought I would stay in my room, stay out of the way like I always had. They didn't know that every whisper was fuel for the fire I had been building in the dark. I slipped the papers into my coat pocket and went down the back stairs, the old wood cool under my fingers. The kitchen was empty, the air still warm from the oven. I paused for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me, and then walked out the back door into the bright, icy morning. I needed answers, and there was only one person left who might have them. The lawyer's office was a short walk from the house, a small brick building that looked out of place on the quiet street. I hesitated at the door, the weight of everything pressing down on me, and then pushed it open. Thomas looked up from his desk, his expression softening when he saw me. "Julia," he said quietly, rising to his feet. "I didn't expect you this morning. I need your help," I said, my voice steady. "I found something." He gestured for me to sit, his gaze sharpening, as I pulled the papers from my pocket and laid them out on the desk. He studied them in silence, his fingers tracing the lines of my father's careful script. "This changes things," he said. Finally, his voice low. "These are real, Julia. They're proof." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding the tightness in my chest, easing for the first time in days. "Then I'm not imagining it," I said softly. "They really did. All of it." Thomas nodded, his eyes kind. "They did. And now you have the first piece you need to fight back." For a moment, the relief was almost overwhelming. But beneath it, the anger was still there, cold and clean, a quiet promise that I wasn't done yet. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, leaning back in his chair, "we start to build your case. We gather everything, every record, every slip of paper they thought they could hide. And we show them that you're not going to let this go." I nodded, feeling the shape of the plan settle into place. It was bigger than I had imagined, messier and more dangerous. But it was mine. And for the first time, I felt like I had the strength to see it through. As I left the office, the winter air hit me like a promise, the cold sharp and clean in my lungs. I walked back to the house with my head high, the papers pressed against my heart like armor. Inside, the silence of the house was different now, no longer a cage, but a challenge. My sister-in-law looked up as I came in, her eyes, narrowing at the sight of the determination in mine. She said nothing, but the tension in her shoulders spoke louder than words. I went straight to my room, locking the door behind me, as I spread the papers out on the desk again. Each word, each careful line, was a crack in the wall they had built around me. And I would find everyone. As night fell, I sat by the window, the glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the floor. The keys were heavy in my hand, the cold metal a reminder of everything I still had to fight for. They thought I was powerless. They thought I would let it go. But I had found the first clue, the first proof that the truth was mine to uncover. and I would not stop until every secret was brought into the light. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but I felt calm for the first time in weeks, because I knew now the power they had stolen wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for me to find it. And I was ready. The days that followed felt like moving through a fog, each moment dense and heavy, every word spoken in the house, laced with meanings no one dared to say out loud. My siblings, and their carefully orchestrated allies, carried on as if nothing had changed. They laughed at the dinner table, spoke of business and family, all while ignoring the quiet storm building in the corners of the room. I watched them closely, the way my brother's eyes flicked to the folder on my nightstand when he thought I wasn't looking, the tight line of my sister-in-law's mouth whenever I entered the room. They thought their silence would be enough to keep me in my place, but I had learned to read the spaces between words, to hear the truths they wouldn't speak. And I had learned that sometimes silence was the sharpest weapon of all. At night, I lay awake in my bed, the folder of papers pressed close to my chest. The keys were always within reach, a constant reminder of what I had to fight for. Each creak of the old house seemed to echo with the voices of the past. My father's low laughter, my mother's soft sighs, all of it a reminder that this was my home too. During the day, I walked the halls with quiet purpose, my eyes open to the small betrayals and petty cruelties that had once slipped by unnoticed. I saw them now, every sideways glance and forced smile, every careful word meant to keep me small. Thomas called me every evening, his calm voice a balm against the chill that seemed to seep deeper into the bones of the house. "They're trying to wear you down," he told me one night. "They're counting on you to doubt yourself." "I'm not going to," I said. And I meant it. The next morning, I found my brother in the study, his back to me, as he flipped through old photographs. I stood in the doorway, my fingers tight around the edge of the doorframe. For a moment, I saw him not as the man who had stolen so much from me, but as the boy he used to be, the one who had once held my hand when the storms outside were too loud to sleep through. But the boy was gone, and in his place was a man who had learned that silence and manipulation were easier than truth. He looked up as I stepped into the room, his expression careful, measured. "Julia," he said, his voice warm and false. "We're worried about you." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" he sighed, setting the photographs down with a soft thud. This fight you're picking, it's going to ruin everything. It's not worth it." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice calm. "It's worth it to me." His eyes flickered just for a moment, and I saw the truth there. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about what I might find, about what would happen if I stopped being the quiet one. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," I said softly. "I'm just trying to take back what was mine." He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and walked past me, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. I watched him go, my heart steady in my chest. They would keep trying to turn this into a personal betrayal, to make me feel like the villain in my own story. But I wouldn't let them. That evening, I met Thomas at his office again. The folder in my hands was heavier than it had been the first time I carried it there, filled with more papers, more truth. He looked through them carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. "You've done good work," he said finally, his voice low. "They won't be able to hide behind polite lies for much longer." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I don't want to destroy them," I admitted. "But I can't keep pretending nothing happened." "You're not destroying them," he said. "You're forcing them to face what they did." "There's a difference." I nodded, the truth of it settling into my bones. When I left his office, the city was quiet, the first stars just beginning to pierce the night sky. I walked back to the house slowly, the cold air sharp and bracing. The windows of the house glowed softly in the darkness, a beacon that once promised warmth and family. I paused at the door, the keys cold in my hand, and let myself feel the weight of what I was about to do. They thought they could silence me with their whispers, that their cold smiles and careful lies would be enough. But they didn't understand that the quietest wars are often the hardest to win. I stepped inside the door, closing behind me, with a soft click. The warmth of the house wrapped around me, but it no longer felt like home. Not yet. But it would. When the truth was finally out, when the last of their whispered doubts had been drowned by the strength of my voice, it would. Because they thought I was powerless, but they were about to see just how wrong they were. The next few days passed in a haze of quiet confrontations and cold glances. Every room in the house felt charged like a storm brewing beneath the surface. I could feel it in the way my sister-in-law's eyes narrowed when I walked into the kitchen, in the way my brother's laughter never quite reached his eyes anymore. They thought I would break under the pressure. They thought if they turned up the heat just enough, I'd fold like I always had. But they didn't know that the silence I carried wasn't weakness anymore. It was strength. At night, I lay awake with the keys pressed to my chest, the cold metal, a promise that I wouldn't let them bury me again. I thought of my father's voice, the way he used to tell me that the truth was always worth fighting for, even when it cost more than you thought you could bear. In the mornings, I forced myself to meet their eyes. I refused to let them see fear in me. I dressed carefully, spoke calmly, and held my head high, even as the whispers grew louder. "She's making a fool of herself," my sister-in-law said one afternoon, her voice just loud enough for me to hear, as she spoke to a cousin in the parlor. "She doesn't know what she's doing. She's going to ruin this family," my brother added. "I don't know what's gotten into her." I paused in the doorway, my hand resting lightly on the frame. For a moment, I almost said something, almost let the anger that had been simmering in my chest spill out. But I held it back, knowing that my silence was more powerful than any accusation, because they could pretend all they wanted. But the truth was in the papers I kept close, in the steady weight of the keys in my pocket. And soon everyone would see it. That evening, Thomas called me from his office, his voice calm and certain. "They're pushing harder," he said. "But they're running out of places to hide. You've done the work, Julia. Now you just have to hold on." "I will," I said softly. "I'm not letting go." "I know," he said, and I could hear the quiet pride in his voice. The next day, I went into town to gather more documents. I spent hours at the county office, my fingers tracing the careful lines of old ledgers and property records. Each page was another crack in the wall they had tried to build around the truth, another piece of the puzzle that was finally starting to come together. By the time I walked back to the house, the winter sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. I paused at the gate, the keys in my hand, cold and solid. I could see them in the window, my brother, his face pale and tense, my sister-in-law's lips pressed into a thin, hard line. They were starting to realize that I wouldn't be silenced this time. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of dinner. My sister-in-law looked up as I stepped through the door, her expression smooth and cold. "You're late," she said. "I had work to do," I said simply. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't argue. She knew it would do no good. We were past the point of polite lies. That night, the tension in the house was so thick, I could almost taste it. My brother tried to act like nothing had changed, telling stories at the dinner table that no one really listened to. My sister-in-law picked at her food, her gaze flicking to me and away, like she was waiting for me to say something that would confirm the fear she tried so hard to hide. I said nothing. I didn't have to. My silence was a shield, and they couldn't find a crack in it. After dinner, I went up to my room and locked the door behind me. I spread the papers out across the bed, the soft glow of the lamp making the ink shimmer like truth brought to light. I read through them again and again, letting the facts steady me, letting the strength of my father's careful words fill the spaces where their lies had once lived. They thought they could break me with their cold smiles and quiet threats. They thought I would give in if they pushed just hard enough. But they were wrong. I sat by the window as the night fell, the cold stars bright in the sky, above the dark outline of the house. I could feel the shape of the fight ahead, ugly, painful, but necessary. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every time they told me I didn't belong, every moment they tried to make me small. It was about reclaiming the truth and refusing to let them write me out of my own story. I let the silence stretch around me, let it settle in my bones like armor, and I knew in that quiet, steady heartbeat that I was ready for whatever came next. The day we filed the legal petition was bitterly cold. I could feel the bite of the winter air as I walked up the courthouse steps beside Thomas, the folder of documents heavy in my hands. Each page was a piece of the truth they had tried so hard to bury each signature, and scribbled note, a reminder that I wasn't just imagining it. Thomas looked at me as we reached the door, his breath fogging in the cold. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Julia?" he asked. I took a slow, steady breath. I've never been more sure of anything. Inside the courthouse smelled of paper and old wood polish, the air heavy with the low murmur of voices. My hands were cold but steady as I handed the papers to the clerk behind the desk. She stamped each one with a heavy thud, the sound echoing through the room like the start of something final. "This is it," Thomas said as we walked back outside. "They can't ignore this anymore." I nodded, my heart beating hard but steady. I know. When I got back to the house, the tension was a living thing. My brother was in the study, his head bowed over a stack of papers he wouldn't let me see. My sister-in-law moved through the kitchen like a shadow, her movements sharp and precise. I could feel their eyes on me as I hung up my coat, as I moved through the rooms like I had every right to be there. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. That night, I sat in my room, with the door locked, the keys, and the legal filings spread out in front of me. My hands traced the lines of the signatures, my father's name bold and steady, my own small, careful scrawl beside it. I let the weight of it settle into me like something solid, something that couldn't be taken away. Downstairs, the house was silent. I could almost hear their thoughts, the quiet panic of people who had spent so long believing they would never be held to account. Thomas called me the next morning. "They'll try to fight this," he said, his voice calm but firm. "They'll try to paint you as the one causing trouble. But we have the facts, Julia, and facts have a way of cutting through the noise." "I'm ready," I said. And I was. The first hearing was set for the following week. My brother tried to act like it was nothing, tried to carry on, with the same calm, condescending smile he had worn for years. But I saw the tightness in his shoulders, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, when he thought I wasn't looking. My sister-in-law stopped speaking to me altogether. She moved through the house like a ghost, her silence louder than any accusation. At night, I lay awake in the dark, the winter wind rattling the windows. I thought about the years I had spent trying to make myself small enough to fit in the spaces they allowed me. I thought about the nights I had sat in this same room, wondering if I was imagining the way they looked at me, like a problem, like a mistake they didn't know how to fix. And I thought about how that was over now. The morning of the hearing dawned bright and cold, the sky a hard, clear blue. I dressed carefully, my hands steady, as I pulled my coat around me. I didn't want to look like I was trying to be someone I wasn't. I just wanted to look like me, like the woman who had found her voice. In the courthouse, Thomas stood beside me, his presence calm and unwavering. My brother sat across the aisle, his face carefully blank, my sister-in-law beside him, with her hands folded tight in her lap. The judge was an older man with kind eyes and a firm voice. He listened as Thomas laid out our case, each word deliberate, each piece of evidence laid bare. He spoke of the missing money, the forged signatures, the quiet manipulations that had turned my life into a footnote in their story. I watched my brother's face as Thomas spoke, watched the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes flicked to the judge and back to me. My sister-in-law's hands trembled just slightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, my hands resting on the edge of the table. My voice was low but steady, each word a quiet blade. "I'm not doing this to hurt them," I said. "I'm doing this because it's the only way to make them see the truth." The judge watched me carefully, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he nodded once slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Julia," he said softly. "We'll take everything into account." The hearing ended, but the weight of it lingered in the air long after we left the courtroom. Outside, the cold wind cut across my face, but I didn't feel it. I felt only the quiet certainty that I had done the right thing. As Thomas and I walked down the steps, He looked at me with a small, proud smile. "You're stronger than they ever thought you were," he said. I nodded, my fingers tightening around the keys in my pocket. "They'll see," I said quietly. "They'll see I'm not powerless anymore." And in that moment, with the winter sun cold and bright on my face, I believed it. The week after the hearing was a blur of tense silences and half-finished conversations. My brother and his wife moved through the house like ghosts. Their smiles forced their voices too calm. But I could feel it, the quiet panic behind their eyes, the fear that everything they had tried to keep buried was finally clawing its way to the surface. I spent most of my time in the small study at the back of the house, poring over every piece of paper Thomas had helped me gather. Each line of text felt like a thread weaving together the story they had tried so hard to hide. One night, I found something I hadn't seen before, a small slip of paper tucked inside the back of an old ledger. It was a receipt, faded and yellowed, but the date and signature were unmistakable. It proved what I had always suspected, that my brother had been funneling money from the estate, long before he ever told me to let it go. My hands trembled as I traced the faded ink. It was the final piece. I hadn't even known I was missing the last key to the puzzle they had tried to lock me out of. I called Thomas the next morning, my voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline in my veins. "I found something," I said. He met me at his office that afternoon, his eyes sharp as I laid the paper in front of him. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable, and then looked up at me with a small, tight smile. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is what we needed." Back at the house, the tension was thicker than ever. My brother wouldn't meet my eyes at dinner, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm against the edge of his plate. My sister-in-law's laughter was brittle, her gaze darting between us like a cornered animal. I said nothing. I let my silence speak for me, let the quiet power of what I held settle into the spaces between us. That night, I dreamed of my father's voice, low and warm, telling me that the truth was always worth the fight. When I woke, the weight of those words was still in my chest, a steady heartbeat that wouldn't be silenced. The next day, I went back to the courthouse with Thomas. The sky was a cold, brittle blue, the air sharp in my lungs. My brother and his wife were already there when we arrived, their lawyer at their side. The proceedings moved quickly, the judge's voice calm and firm as he reviewed the new evidence. My brother's lawyer tried to argue, tried to twist the truth into something that would fit their narrative, but the paper I had found was too clear, too final. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, my hands resting on the edge of the table. My voice didn't shake. "I never wanted to fight them," I said softly, "but they left me no choice. I deserve the truth, and I deserve what was mine from the start." The judge listened carefully, his eyes thoughtful. When I finished, he nodded once slowly. "We'll take this new evidence into account," he said. "Thank you, Ms. Julia." Outside the courtroom, my brother stopped me in the hallway, his face pale and drawn. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly, his voice a low hiss. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the fear he was trying so hard to hide. "No," I said softly. "I think you're the one who's afraid." He turned away, without another word, his shoulders hunched as he walked down the hall. Back at the house, I felt the shift in the air the moment I walked through the door. My sister-in-law wouldn't even look at me, her mouth tight with anger. My brother didn't speak at all, his silence louder than any threat. I went up to my room, the keys cold and heavy in my hand. I sat by the window as the sun set, the pale light fading into the long, cold dark. I thought of the years I had spent in this house, trying so hard to be small enough to fit into the spaces they allowed me. But I wasn't small anymore. And I wasn't done. They thought I was powerless. But they were about to see just how wrong they were. The days after I found that final piece of evidence passed in a blur of icy tension and unspoken truths. Every step I took in that house felt deliberate, each breath a quiet act of defiance. My brother's eyes never left me, watchful and wary, and my sister-in-law's smile had vanished altogether. I kept the paper close tucked into the folder that had become both shield and sword. I could feel the shift in the air around me, the quiet realization that I was no longer the girl they could dismiss with a few cold words. The morning of the next hearing dawned gray and cold, a thin layer of frost on the window panes. I dressed carefully, my hands steady as I pinned my hair back, as I slipped the folder into my bag. In the mirror, my reflection stared back at me, calm, resolute, a woman who was done being invisible. At the courthouse, the silence was heavy as we waited. My brother sat across the room, his lawyer at his side, their voices low and urgent. My sister-in-law wouldn't look at me, her eyes fixed on the cold marble floor. Thomas sat beside me, his presence a quiet comfort. "This is it," he said softly. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "I've never been more ready." The judge entered, his expression grave as he called the hearing to order. My brother's lawyer tried to paint me as bitter as someone who couldn't let go of old grievances. His words were careful, polished, designed to make me seem small, petty. But when Thomas stood, the air shifted. His voice was calm but firm, each word a quiet blow against the careful lies they had woven. He laid out the evidence piece by piece, the ledger entries, the hidden transfers, the final receipt that showed the theft in black and white. And when it was my turn, I stood with the folder in my hands, my voice low but steady. "I didn't come here to destroy them," I said softly. "I came here because the truth matters, because I will not let them erase me." The judge watched me carefully, his eyes kind but sharp. When I finished, he nodded once. "Thank you, Ms. Julia." My brother didn't look at me. My sister-in-law's hands were clenched tight in her lap, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could feel the weight of their silence, the fear and anger and disbelief that they could no longer hide behind polite smiles. When the hearing ended, Thomas and I stepped outside into the cold winter light. He looked at me with quiet pride. "No matter what happens next, you've already won," he said. "You've taken back your voice." I nodded, my breath fogging in the sharp air. "I know," I said. And I did. Back at the house, the tension was a living thing. My brother didn't speak to me at all, moving through the rooms like a ghost. My sister-in-law's cold silence was sharper than any words she might have thrown at me. But I didn't care. I had learned that their silence was nothing compared to the quiet strength I had found in myself. That night, I sat by the window in my room, the keys cold and solid in my hand. The house was quiet, but I could feel the storm still raging beneath the surface. They thought if they ignored me, if they pretended none of it mattered, I would go away. But I wasn't going anywhere. As I watched the snow begin to fall soft and silent against the window, I felt a kind of peace settle over me. The fight wasn't over. There would be more hearings, more attempts to twist the truth into something that suited their needs. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because they thought I was powerless. But now, I held the keys, and I was ready to see this through to the end. The next hearing was set for a bright winter morning, the sun low and cold, in a sky the color of frost. I woke before dawn, my heart steady, as I dressed each button and zip a quiet ritual of preparation. Today was the day everything would come to light, the final battle I had been preparing for all this time. Thomas met me outside the courthouse, his expression calm and resolute. "They'll try everything today," he said softly. "But we have the truth, Julia, and that's more powerful than anything they can say." I nodded, my hands wrapped tightly around the folder that had become my shield. "I know," I said. And I did. I felt it in my bones. Inside, the courtroom was hushed, the air charged with the quiet weight of what was about to unfold. My brother sat at the long table across from me, his shoulders tense, his eyes dark with something like desperation. My sister-in-law sat beside him, her face pale, her fingers knotted tightly in her lap. They didn't look at me as the judge entered, his voice calm and steady as he called the proceedings to order. Thomas rose first, his words precise and measured as he laid out the final pieces of our case. The ledger entries, the hidden bank transfers, the signature that had finally unspooled the web of lies they had built around me. I watched my brother as Thomas spoke, saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers drummed nervously against the table. My sister-in-law's face was a mask of careful calm, but I could see the fear in the way her eyes darted toward the judge and then away again. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my hands steady on the folder, as I looked at the judge. My voice was low but clear. "I'm not here for revenge," I said softly. "I'm here because the truth matters. Because my father built this family on trust and love, and they tried to turn that into something twisted and ugly." The room was silent as I spoke, the weight of every word settling into the spaces between us. My brother's lawyer shifted in his seat, his arguments faltering in the face of the quiet certainty I carried with me. When I finished, the judge leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady as he looked at each of us in turn. "Thank you, Ms. Julia," he said softly. "This will be taken into account." The rest of the hearing passed in a blur of quiet arguments and careful questions. My brother's lawyer tried to twist the narrative to make me seem bitter and petty. But each time Thomas rose to his feet, his calm voice cutting through the noise with the quiet power of the truth. When the final arguments were made, the judge closed his notes and looked at us all with a kind of weary gravity. "I will take everything you've shared under advisement," he said. "A final decision will be issued shortly." As I stepped outside into the bright winter light, I felt the weight of the morning settle over me like a cloak. My brother and his wife walked past me without a word, their eyes fixed straight ahead. But I didn't need them to say anything. I had seen what was in their eyes, and I knew they understood now that I wasn't the same woman who had once let them decide who I was allowed to be. Thomas laid a hand on my shoulder as we stood on the steps. "You did everything you could," he said quietly. "No matter what happens, you've already taken back what they tried to take from you." I nodded, my breath a soft cloud in the cold air. "I know," I said, "and I'm not going to stop until the truth is finally seen." Back at the house, the silence was deeper than ever. My brother and his wife avoided me, their words clipped and cold when they spoke at all. But I didn't care. I had found my strength, and I wasn't going to give it up again. That night, I sat by the window, the stars sharp and bright above the dark shape of the house. The keys lay in my hand, cold and solid, a promise I had made to myself and to the girl I used to be, the girl who had once believed she wasn't enough. I thought of my father's voice, low and warm in my memory. "Never be afraid to stand up for what you know is right," he had told me. And I wasn't afraid anymore. The fight wasn't over. The final ruling was still to come. But I had already won something that no one could ever take away again, the quiet certainty that I was no longer the powerless one. I watched the snow fall, each flake soft and silent, and felt the quiet power of that truth settle into my bones. They thought I was powerless, but I held the keys, and I was ready to see this through to the very end. The final decision came on a day so bright and cold that it seemed the whole world was holding its breath. I woke early, the pale winter light filtering through the curtains, and felt the stillness in my bones, like everything I had been carrying for so long was finally ready to be put down. I dressed in silence, my hands steady, as I buttoned my coat and slipped the keys into my pocket. They felt lighter than they ever had, no longer a burden, but a promise, a reminder that this fight was mine, and I had seen it through to the end. Thomas met me outside the courthouse, his expression calm and resolute. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm ready." Inside the courtroom was hushed, the air heavy with the weight of everything that had come before. My brother sat across the room, his shoulders rigid, his face pale. My sister-in-law's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands twisting in her lap. They didn't look at me as the judge entered, his robe trailing softly across the polished wood floor. When he began to speak, his voice was low and deliberate. He spoke of the evidence we had laid bare, the careful lies that had been woven into the very fabric of our family. He spoke of the law of fairness and justice, of the simple, unyielding power of the truth. And then, finally, he spoke of me. "Miss Julia," he said, his eyes meeting mine, "you have shown this court not just the facts, but the quiet courage to stand up for what is yours. This court recognizes your rightful claim to the property in question, as well as your standing as an heir to the estate. The words settled over me like a balm, each one a quiet affirmation that everything I had fought for mattered. My brother didn't speak. His face was pale and tight, his hands clenched white around the edge of the table. My sister-in-law turned away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I felt a quiet strength bloom in my chest, a warmth that chased away the cold that had lived there for so long. When the hearing ended, I stood slowly, the keys heavy in my hand. Thomas looked at me with a small, proud smile. "It's done," he said softly. I nodded, the weight of those words settling into my bones. "It's done," I echoed. Outside, the winter sun was bright on the snow, the light glinting off the ice-crusted branches. My breath fogged in the cold air, each inhale sharp and clear. I stood on the steps of the courthouse for a long moment, letting the quiet settle around me like a promise. Back at the house, the air felt different, no longer thick with tension, but empty, waiting. My brother and his wife had already packed their things, the rooms stripped bare of the quiet cruelties they had tried to hide behind polite smiles. I walked through the halls, slowly, the keys cool and solid in my hand. The memories were still there, but they no longer held me captive. Each step felt like a reclamation, a quiet affirmation that this was mine, and no one could take it from me again. In the living room, I paused by the old piano, my fingers brushing the dusty keys. My mother's laughter echoed in my memory, soft and warm. My father's voice low and steady, telling me that the truth was always worth the fight. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of those memories wash over me, a balm against the years of doubt and fear. And then, slowly, I let them go. That night, I lit a single candle in the living room, the soft glow filling the space with a quiet peace. I sat by the window, the snow falling softly outside, and felt the weight of the years lift from my shoulders. They had thought I was powerless. They had tried to make me small, to silence me with cold words and careful lies. But they hadn't understood that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers quiet and steady, unbreakable. I held the keys in my hand, the cold metal warm against my skin, and let a small smile curve my lips. Because this wasn't just about a house or a name on a piece of paper. It was about finding my voice, about refusing to let them decide who I was allowed to be. And in the end, I had found something stronger than their lies, something they could never take from me again. I had found myself,